And it's now my great pleasure to introduce today's guest, Chris Pavone. Chris wrote an international thriller called The Expats. And if you've been to these webinars, you've heard me mention it. I recommend it all the time. It's a wonderful book. It won both the Edgar and the Anthony Award. 2 Nights in Lisbon was an instant bestseller. And most recently, The Doorman, a New York Times notable book of 2025. His novels have appeared on all the major bestseller lists, have won or been shortlisted for the Edgar Anthony Strand, Macavity, and Thriller Fest Awards, and the Los Angeles Times Book Prize. They're in development for film and television, and they've been translated into more than 24 languages. Chris worked in publishing for nearly 2 decades at Doubleday and HarperCollins, among other publishers, in positions ranging from copy editor and managing editor to executive editor and deputy publisher. When his wife got a job in Luxembourg, the family moved abroad. And Chris raised their twin boys and began writing The Expats. They're now back in the United States. They live in New York City. John, we're ready for you. I'm going to start with the acknowledgments that you wrote in many of your books, and many of them are long and detailed and contain such interesting and important information. And I'm specifically now referring to the acknowledgement you wrote for the Paris diversion. Mm-hmm. In that book, you talked at some length about your writing process. And to summarize, your wife gave you a birthday gift of a week in Paris to finish the book or work on the book that you were currently writing. And here's what you wrote. You said that you landed in Paris and an entirely new book idea intruded on my consciousness urgently, merging an old idea and an apparent terrorist attack that turns out to be something else with my long simmering desire to write a sequel to The Expats. And I have to digress and say, fabulous book. Everyone must read that book. I recommend it all the time. I recommend all your books. You're one of my favorite authors now. I know I'm sounding fangirl. There you go.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Expats. It's truly an astonishing book, I think. And a new impulse to set a novel in Paris. So my first question to you is, do ideas often come to you unbidden?
Oh, I remember somebody asking an author, where do you get your ideas from? And the author responding, I don't know. Where do you get your ideas from? And I don't know about the unbidden part. I have a lot of ideas for books, stories, television shows, movies. I will not write almost any of them. There are far too many ideas for me to execute. It takes me 2 or 3 years to go through the full process of publishing a book, and I'm already 57 years old, and I have more ideas than I have years left in me. And the thing is that they just keep growing. Like I have 25 now, and next year I will have 30, and I will have only begun to execute 1 or 2 of them. So I don't have a deficit of ideas. What I have, what is to me one of the biggest challenges of being a writer, is how do you figure out which one is the right one? Which idea is the right one? Not just in terms of what is the book you can see yourself writing the clearest right now, but which is the right one for me at this moment in my career, at this moment in the history of the world, in this moment in publishing? What's the right book to write? And I don't think there's no easy answer to that. And it's something that's, of course, it's very emotional. I don't think there are a lot of facts involved in it, but it takes a lot to figure out for me, what's the book I'm going to write now? And you're talking about the book that I set in Paris, which is a combination of a Paris novel and really a 9/11 novel that happens to take place in Paris instead of New York, and a novel about what we are doing when we say we are fighting terrorism, or when we say we are embarking on one type of international war or another. What is it that we're really doing, and why are we doing it? And I had the vision to create all of those things at once. And that book all of a sudden came out of nowhere and rose to the top of my list of things that I wanted to write, and thought it was a good time to write, and thought I am indeed a good person to write it, and the world might be willing to read this thing. And all of those things came together at once.
And I can see the same set of imperatives coming together for The Doorman, which was your most recent novel.
Yeah.
Am I right on that?
Yeah, absolutely. But before I had the idea for the novel, for The Doorman, I had a list of 15 other ideas I wanted to pursue. And then the idea for a book that takes place in a microcosm of New York, about a microcosm of America, and all the problems we're facing right now of race and racism and class, and the conflict with ambition and morality and amorality and crime and punishment. All of those things, I saw a way to bring them together in a book that is about this moment in America, while also being a very specific thriller about New York City, and also while being a thriller, full stop. That it's one of the things that I'm always looking for. All of my books are first and foremost a thriller. I think it's clear from the opening pages of all of my books that you're in a suspense novel, and it's clear from the very first sentence of The Doorman that somebody is going to die in this book. But all of my books are also about something else. And the plot about the suspense plot, whether it's an espionage plot or, in this case, really a domestic suspense plot, the plot that keeps the reader moving forward is the structure that's there to look at other parts of life that are much more relatable than the plot itself. Some of my books, even the Expats, they're plots that are not really that relatable to people. Like, I have people moving abroad and changing their names and stealing millions, tens of millions of dollars, and climbing out on ledges with guns. None of that is something I expect people to relate to. But that book, in which all of that goes on, is also fundamentally a book about marriage. And that is, I think, the thing that in the end is the most rewarding to people. The plot is the thing that keeps you turning the pages, but it's the examination of these other issues that I think I don't want to sound pompous about this, but I think it's the thing that makes my books good.
This gets into the thematic section, which I'll have a couple of more specific questions for, but it really almost sounds like you're writing thematically as you're writing plot-driven, fast-moving thrillers.
Absolutely, but I don't want the three main elements that I think of in these books are the plot and the themes and the protagonists, the other characters. And what I try to do is construct all of those to be interdependent on one another. The plot is not something that is foisted upon a character. The plot is part of the character. The plot exists because of the character. The things that have gone in the character's life are what's causing the plot. And there's a lot of suspense that's not about that. Like most police procedurals, the plot has nothing to do with the character. The plot is something that's foisted upon the character so that the character has something to do. And maybe you learn a lot about the character that makes it an interesting book. Maybe you learn a lot about the character's relationships with other characters, but those things are really independent of the plot, which is the discovery of who committed a crime. That has nothing to do with the protagonist. I don't have anything against those books. Those are not the books that I'm trying to write. The books that I'm trying to write are those in which the plot and the character are dependent upon each other. They define each other. They're inextricable from each other. And as are the themes. All of those things are, in my goal, those things are all a unit that create a full world of, here's this person, here's the problem they're in, this is a problem that only this person could be in, and it's about these themes.
Which is a perfect segue to my next question. In that same acknowledgement, you said you wrote on a laptop in a cafe every morning. You also said, and this is your word, you trudged throughout the city, mile after mile, stopping on street corners to scribble notes. You say that within a few days, the entire story, again, your words, resolved itself. And you adding specifically every plot twist, the most important scenes, the reveals, the red herrings. So first question here, do any of the plot twists as you're writing or the placement of them, are those all preset in advance, or do any of them happen as you're writing, change as you're writing? How does that work? This is really also a question about story pace.
Mm-hmm. Everything changes while I'm writing. I start with, well, I'll tell you. The main thing I start with is a document that's 1 or 2 or 3 pages long that I write for myself. That's sort of like the flap copy of a book or the query letter that you would write to an agent or a book publisher's catalog description, or in fact, the description that you find on the Amazon page of a book. That copy was written by somebody. And for my books, I write that copy before I write the book as a way of explaining to myself what this book is, what's going to happen, who is the protagonist, who is the antagonist, what is the central conflict, what are we aiming at, what is the general shape of this thing. And I don't figure out what every plot twist is going to be in that document, but I do figure out what types of plot twists there are going to be and what the story is accelerating towards. What is that point at the end that we're going to get to? And I do this for a couple of reasons. One is to give myself a roadmap for the book that I want to write. And then I expand that roadmap to be a more comprehensive outline. But the other is to make sure that the book I'm writing is something that can be explained. And if a book can't be explained, it's much better to figure that out at the beginning than to write a whole book and then come to the end and realize, I don't know how to explain this book. Because if you don't know how to explain this book, it's possible that nobody else is going to be able to explain it well. And if it can't be explained well in a page, it really is doomed commercially. That books live and die on these one-page explanations. There's so many parts of a book's life begin and end with somebody important reading for 1 minute. And if they like what they read, they will say yes and move it along. If they don't like what they read, it's going to die right then. And whether that's at the agent stage or the editor stage or the sales rep stage or the buyer stage or the reviewer stage or the film producer stage, everybody is always reading one-page descriptions of a book. If that. The title is so important. The log line is so important. The one-page description is so important. And I think it's at least it's useful for me to get all of those things set before I write the book, before I spend 2 years writing a book to figure out what it is I want this book to be about. And then as I start working on the book, I revise that thing occasionally while also making sure that the revisions I'm making are for the better. And not just because I sat around and some idea occurred to me for this other plot twist or this other character and I fell in love with it, but then trying to integrate that new character or that new plot twist into this document sometimes teaches me, no, don't do that. That doesn't fit in with this story. This story does not need that. It's not getting better because of that. It's just getting longer.
Do you keep a file of ideas that are rejected for this project but are still good ideas?
Well, I keep a file of book ideas, story ideas. And at this moment, there are at least 25, if not 30 of those ideas. And some of them are very, very bare bones. Some of them are just a title. I think titles are very important. And I was a book editor for a good chunk of time. And although I was not a fiction editor ever, I was always on the lookout for titles. Books that are badly titled from the get-go have a really difficult uphill battle. And I think in a lot of nonfiction, it's relatively straightforward to know when you have a good title. The title describes what the book is. The title tells you what the problem is and how to solve it. If the title is a biography of Mark Twain, then Mark Twain is a great title for that. And one of the easiest titling jobs I ever had in my life, one of the easiest pitches I ever had in my life, is for a while I was a cookbook editor, and I was the in-house editor at a publisher called Clarkson Potter. We published Martha Stewart, and I was the editor of a couple of Martha Stewart books. And one of those books was the easiest pitch I ever had to make in front of a room in my life. This was to all the marketing, publicity, salespeople. It was a room of about 100 people, and we'd published a lot of Martha Stewart books previously. But this one, I was able to stand in front of the room and say, Martha Stewart Baking Handbook. And I did not need to say anything else. Everybody knew exactly what that book was going to be, what it was going to look like, what was going to be on the cover, how long it was going to be. Everybody knew everything just from saying those 4 words. And that is a real luxury that almost no books have. And especially in fiction, where it's not solving anybody's problem. It's not telling you, here's a biography of this last president, or here's how to bake if you have celiac disease. Like it's starting from zero. Nobody needs this book. How do you convince them that they want it? And one of the things that I think it's important for a title to be able to communicate in some type of shorthand is what genre it is. What sort of book is this? And do something. The title ought to do something. It needs to communicate something to the reader and not confuse them, but just tell them something that gives them an idea of what it is. I don't know how you browse for books, but I browse for books by looking at covers and looking at titles. And if I'm standing in a bookstore and I look at 50 covers and titles, I'm only going to pick up 2 of them. And that is based only on title, author, and cover design. And so there are 48 out of 50 books I'm not even glancing at because something about them is telling me it's not for me. I don't want to read this. But on the other hand, those 2 books have done a good job of identifying me as a reader and saying, this is for you.
That's great. That's fascinating and important, and translates, I would say, to one of the most frequent questions I get, which is how to write a synopsis.
Yeah.
You just answered that question.
Well, in truth, I don't actually write synopses. Maybe I write a synopsis as an ancillary document, but the thing I'm talking about, the description I'm talking about, is not really a plot synopsis. I think that's a mistake that people make in thinking that a plot synopsis is the same thing as a description. It's not. A description is also touching on the themes of the book, and really it's telling you what is good about this book. And if the plot is the only thing good about the book, all right, then you're going to talk a lot about the plot. But most books are not good because of the plot. And what are those things? And I don't go out and explain to myself, this is an upmarket literary thriller. That I think you shouldn't need to say that. You should be able to communicate that by writing a story that presents itself as that. I think that, to me, the important thing about writing this document is justifying what is special about this, what is interesting about this, what is compelling about this. And part of that is going to be the plot for most books, but not all of it. The vast majority of what I'm talking about in these documents is almost always not the plot. It's the protagonist, it's a secondary character or 2, it's the antagonist, it's the central conflict, it's the milieu, it's the themes, it's what is this book about? And the plot, that's something that I'm figuring out at the same time by creating an outline of 10 to 15 important reveals, and then an outline of 50 to 100 chapters. But those outlines about constructing the plot are something after the figuring out of what is the book, why should it exist in the world, why would somebody want to read this? If this book needs flap copy, and it does, what is the compelling flap copy that is going to convince a reader like me, who's looking for the types of books that I like to read? How am I going to convince me that I want to read this book? And that's the thing that I'm writing.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I know it sounds ridiculous.
It does not sound ridiculous. I'm a writer. I know exactly what you're talking about. And what it does is it it takes an amorphous process and gives it shape.
Yes.
And anything that does that is so helpful. What you just described is not going to work for every writer, but it's another thing to try.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Many of your books include expats. You were one yourself in Luxembourg. I have a question about expats in general, and then I have another question. Do you think expats, by and large, are expats because they want to be there or because they don't want to be at home?
I think that's a good question. I think it's impossible for me to answer that. I think it's probably a combination of both. For some people who make the choice to be lifetime expats, which I did not do, I feel like it's a choice to not be where you're from, where you grew up. That was not the case for me. What we were looking for was an adventure, and it was an opportunity that presented itself, and we said yes. It was not. It was not a long-term choice of I don't want to live in New York anymore. I don't want to live in America anymore. It was yes, let's go try this thing while we can. One of the reasons I write about expats so much is I feel like it's a it's sort of a grown up type of version of shorthand that in some other books is presented the opportunity presented by zombies. If you hear the word zombie, you know a lot of what's going on in this book. You know that there's been some type of apocalypse. You know the challenges that the protagonists are going to be facing. You have learned a lot about what type of story this is going to be just from the one word. And I feel like it's not as efficient in expats, but you know that these characters are in a place where they don't necessarily know how to do everything, where they are disconnected from where they're from, where they are on an adventure or a mission, where they're going to face challenges that are extraordinary, and not extraordinary as in fantastical, but extraordinary as in out of the ordinary. That they're
Yes.
going to be in a situation where you can see yourself being, but you have not been probably.
Yes, it's like an everyman.
Yes, and here's the situation: you're an everyman, but here you are. You're in Luxembourg, or you're in Lisbon, or you're in Paris. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Talk to me about your writing schedule, because you wrote in the morning in a cafe. After dinner, you wrote more. What is a typical writing schedule for you?
Well, that schedule that you're talking about in Paris was in the acknowledgments was really just 1 week in Paris, and that week I've had a bunch of times in my life. It is always the most productive work I ever do, and there's something about absenting yourself from everything about your life, from your home, from your spouse, from your children, from your dog, from your laundry machine, from your car that needs repairs, from everything, and being in a place where you cannot do anything about those problems. That gives me the ability to fall into a story so completely that if I spend, I don't know about you, if I spend every waking minute thinking about characters and story, I come to a lot of very, very quick and natural decisions about what should happen to them. I see them so clearly. I get to imagine their lives so much more clearly. And even if I'm writing very well in New York, if I wake up in bed with my wife and my dog and I eat my breakfast at my kitchen table and I go out for the day and then I have lunch with some friend and then I come back and I cook dinner, I only spend 1 out of maybe 4 hours of that day thinking about the book. And these adventures that I've gone on, Paris and Mexico and Stockholm, these are places where I spend 4 out of 4 of my hours, all of my hours, thinking about the book, even when I'm eating. And that is does a different thing to my brain. And that's such a useful thing to me. That's not my normal life, though. My normal life is I leave the apartment at 8:30 in the morning. I go to a place that's not home so I can work and focus and not be distracted by my desire to start cooking a stew at 8:30 in the morning. And I work until lunchtime. Sometimes I work through lunch, but rarely after it. Or when I say work, that's when I write. As you know, there are a lot of other parts of the job of being a writer that are not writing, and I tend to do those in the afternoon. But my writing time is the morning, and when I'm writing a book, I do that every day, usually 7 days a week. And in the afternoon, I do other things. And one of those other things that's very important to me is seeing people and having lunch with people. I have lunch with people a couple of times a week who are either other writers or editors or agents or people who work in publishing. It is a way of having colleagues without having an office job.
Understood. You talked about your agent, David Gertner, helping you avoid overthinking.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that overthinking isn't just thinking?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think one of the things that defines writers is, in fact, overthinking. I think uh, that's what we do. That's sort of the point of us. Um, I think it's very hard to know when to be done with something. It's very hard to know when to move on. And one of the things that I decided at the very beginning of trying to be a novelist is to try to trust people and to listen to them tell me what to do sometimes. And luckily, I've had access to people whose opinions I really value, and my agent is one of them. And I've tried to just accept that if these people tell me this is good, then it's good. If people tell me you're done, then I'm done. Because it's very hard to know for yourself. It's very hard to trust that you've put in the comma, you've taken it out, you've put it back in. But should I take it out again? And then sooner or later, somebody needs to say, "Shut the fuck up, just move on." So
There just aren't a lot of people in the world that get that. Should it be so or and? Do you revise as you write, or is revision a separate process?
both. I start every day by revising yesterday. And sometimes that's 5 minutes, sometimes that's an hour, sometimes that's rarely, but sometimes it's throwing away all of yesterday. Um, and I also revise the beginning uh, an infinite number of times. I am constantly getting new ideas for the beginning, and not necessarily an idea for an entire way to make the scene new, but new phrases or sentences or ideas to add to the first 1, 2, or 5 pages. It is so important for the beginning to work well. And different people have different opinions of what working well is. And I know that some people who read suspense fiction, I once heard somebody on a stage at a conference say, if the bodies don't start piling up on page 1, I'm not interested. If the bodies start piling up on page 1, I am by definition not interested. This is a matter of taste. But what I do think is very important is for whatever is going to be good about a book to be good on page 1. That if what's really good about the book is your voice, if what's really good about the book is the situation your protagonist finds herself in, if what's really good about the book is the milieu, whatever is going to be really good, whatever is going to distinguish this book from the million other books that are going to be published next year, whatever is going to set it apart should set it apart on page 1. And it's hard to figure out what is going to set it apart. And it's hard to know what things you can put into a page 1 without it seeming like you're trying to throw everything into an already crowded basket. It's hard to do it in a way that looks and feels natural. And that's one of the reasons why I do it constantly. There are almost no weeks in the writing of a book when I do not go back to page 1 and do something to it. And that makes me a slow writer. And I'm glad that nobody is looking over my shoulder and saying, what the hell are you doing? Why are you on page 1? You need to write chapter 52 today. But I think so much of the ball game in every type of book is page 1, is appealing to your reader in some way immediately. This is how people browse for books. This is how people whether they're agents or editors or reviewers or customers in a bookstore. This is how people begin assessing the books. They start reading page 1, and if they don't like page 1, they don't read page 2.
Moving on to point of view. I couldn't agree more, by the way.
Thank you.
A point of view.
Yeah.
You write multiple points of view, and you often write from a woman's point of view.
Yeah.
So let's start with multiple points of view. How do you decide who is worthy of getting their own point of view?
I don't always write multiple points of view. Some of my books are from just one point of view. I'm pretty sure that my last book, Two Nights in Lisbon, the protagonist is every scene is in it, and it's a question of whose story this is. And if it is primarily one person's story, then it's one person's point of view. The Doorman is primarily from 3 main points of view, but it's also from a couple of really minor points of view as well. That is more of an ensemble cast, because the different points of view are sort of the point of the book, that the book is about points of view in a lot of ways. I think this decision of how many points of view you're going to have is very intimately intertwined with the type of story you're trying to tell. And I think obviously it's the most fundamental decision about a book there is. I think one of the biggest struggles in point of view is figuring out where on the continuum you want to sit from omniscience or close third person or first person. Where do you want to be, especially in what most books are, which is third person? How close do you want that third person to be? Do you want to be really inside every character's brain, or really inside your protagonist's brain, so that the reader knows absolutely everything that the protagonist knows? Or do you want to pull back a bit and leave open the opportunity that the protagonist or the characters are not telling the reader everything? And I feel like it's very important to choose that point on the continuum and be there for the whole book. That if you're going to be 100% honest with the reader and allow them into every thought of the protagonist, then you absolutely cannot then at the end reveal that you've been lying, if you know what I mean. That I myself think it's infuriating when novels invite you in and pretend that you are in the closest of third person, and then reveal somewhere along the way that the protagonist has been completely dishonest with the reader, meaning the author has been completely dishonest with the reader. I think that's cheap, and it makes me angry.
And there's a difference between that and an unreliable narrator, where you're not faking that close third.
Right. An unreliable narrator, I think, can work great if you're not deep into that point of view, if there's a certain distance from it, if the reader is not getting the unreliable narrator's every thought, then it can make sense in Act 3 to find out that there was this hugely important thing withheld. And in fact, I do withhold things from my readers all the time, and that's one of the reasons that I don't indulge in the closest of third person points of view in almost any of my books, because that's not, I want to be able to withhold things from the readers without being coy about it and without provoking fury at the end.
Seems like a reasonable goal.
Thank you.
Talk about writing from a woman's point of view. And I'll frame the question by saying that Ed McBain, one of my favorite authors, the 87, The Precinct Mysteries, his procedurals, among many, many other books and series that he wrote, he once revealed that he felt he struggled writing women's characters unless there was a man in the room.
I have spent most of my adult life in the company of women. My I worked in publishing offices for a long time, and publishing is very, very heavily female. And when I stopped having jobs in publishing, I spent a lot of my life as a parent of little kids. And so many of the people who do that in America are women. So many of the people, all of the people who I sat in playgrounds with were women. So many of the people who I served on PTA committees or went on school trips with were women. So many people who are my best friends are women. And I have been listening to their stories for the entirety of my life. And a lot of their stories and a lot of their predicaments I find much more compelling than I find male stories. And I don't think I set out deliberately only to write female characters, and I don't. I have one book that has a male protagonist, maybe two. There's a book that has a bunch of characters, and maybe a male is the lead in that. It's hard to say, but the ideas that have occurred to me so far, and I've only published 6 books, so it's not like there aren't 50 of them, and they've all been women. The ideas that have occurred to me most strongly, the books that I can see most clearly, the books that have felt right to me to write right now, most of them have been women's stories primarily. And I don't know how you go about doing that in a practical way. It's just
The voice is there.
the voice is there. But in truth, the Doorman, my most recent book, has 3 main characters, and 2 of them are men.
Mm.
So I think it's hard to say who the protagonist is of that book. It would stand to reason that it's the Doorman, but he's not really the protagonist. I think the protagonist is the female character named Emily.
I would agree with that. That was my impression
Yeah.
when I read it. One last question about point of view. Does the villain need to have his or her own point of view?
Well, villain is a tough word. Most of my books don't have villains, and I don't think the Doorman has a villain either. That I'm not often that fond of villain books. Villainy is predicated on very often a type of evil that I don't necessarily believe in. I don't really believe that almost anybody is evil. I think that most people see themselves as the heroes of their own story, and that they see themselves as good people. And I am much more interested in stories in which people may have disagreements about what it means to be a good person and what it means to do acceptable versus unacceptable things. And that none of them is necessarily all good or all bad, and that there isn't a villain. There's a protagonist and an antagonist, but the antagonist doesn't need to be a villain. It just needs to be somebody who's in conflict with the protagonist. And I think it's been a while since I read The Expats, my first novel, I have to admit, but there is no villain in The Expats, that they're only good guys. It is not clear, though, who is a good guy at all times. And as it turns out, everybody is in their own way. But they are people who, through perfectly natural reasons, find themselves in a really big conflict. And I think that's a very compelling situation to be in, because I think in most of our lives, or certainly in good lives, you are not in conflict with villains out there. You're not in conflict with evil, but you might be in plenty of conflict. And that's what real life is. And my stories are real life taken to bigger extremes, because I think that's the point of a lot of fiction. That's the thing that I'm trying to accomplish. Yes, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm thinking, and I'm not going to get everything right, but The Accident, for example,
Mm-hmm.
Charlie Wolf,
Yeah,
who appears in more than one book,
yeah.
he's pretty villainous to me, I got to tell you.
He's pretty villainous, but I also don't think he's evil necessarily. I think and
Surely he knows he's doing the wrong thing. He's not the hero of his own story. He's just a narcissistic, manipulative bastard.
I think a narcissistic, manipulative bastard probably thinks that he is a hero. I think that's part of what it means to be a narcissist. But yeah, there are some people in my novels who are worse than others. But in general, the premise is not good versus bad.
Yeah, I understand.
The thing that I'm going after.
All right, let's talk theme.
Yeah.
You use epigraphs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an apposite quote at the beginning of a book or chapter that sets the thematic mood. I love them. I think it gives the reader something to think about.
Yeah.
And to sort of, it creates some architecture around the story. In The Accident, you quote Jean Renoir, "Is it possible to succeed without any act of betrayal?" In The Travelers, you quote Henry Ward Beecher, "To know that one has a secret is to know half the secret itself." And then the Doorman, you include two. I just think these are fabulous. "Money often costs too much." That's Ralph Waldo Emerson. And this one is just chilling. George Orwell. "If you kept the small rules, you could break the big ones."
Yes.
And my question for you is, at what point in the writing process do you choose the epigraphs?
At all points, really. The epigraphs that end up in the book are one or two of maybe dozens that I have looked for at some moment in my life. Something will occur to me to say, I want to find an epigraph about money. And then I will go looking for quotes about money. Mm-hmm. But then it may not end up being the epigraph that ends up in the book because something else will have occurred to me that might be a better idea. And the epigraphs are part of my mission, along with a title and a reading line and a first page and a first chapter, of trying to set up the whole thing as clearly as possible for the reader, as quickly as possible. And I think epigraphs are a great shorthand to be able to tell people, here is what this book is about.
Yeah.
Way that is not saying, here's what this book is about. Mm-hmm. And I think, and not to, I don't want to toot my own horn about this, and it's not about the epigraphs, but one of the things that I feel is most successful, and it's a ridiculous thing to say about a book that has 110,000 words in it, but The Doorman opens with a sentence that tells you, the reader, what is going to happen in this book. And then here are 110,000 words of how you get there. It is clear from the first sentence that somebody is going to die in this book, but I am not telling you who, and I'm not telling you how or where or when, or I think the most interesting question is why. But here it is, here's this character, somebody's going to die, boom. Now, this is the next 10 hours of your reading life. And I sort of love stories that tell you this, that present it right there. Here it is, now watch. And that part of the reason for epigraphs to me is to be able to do that too. Here is a book about money. Here it is.
We talked about openings before, and now we're doing the same thing, really, which is so interesting. I think about this. I call it the narrative question. It is our job as writers to lay out, it's an implied promise to the reader. You stick with me for those, in your case, 110,000 words. You're going to get an answer to this question, whether it is who was murdered, who's going to die. We don't know murdered at that point. Who's going to die, and ultimately up to the why, or whether it is, will the marriage survive? Whatever that key question is, and I think you're making the point that the epigraph is one of the ways you do that. I want to switch to the broader principle of thematic writing, and this sort of segues into your, I think, astonishing gift just at the sentence level as a writer. I mean, come on, Chris, you're such a great writer.
Thank you so much. This is a great question. Keep going with this.
Whatever it is. I mean, we writers have to be good at so many things, and we've already talked about a lot of them today. We have to be good at coming up with worthy ideas, at plotting, at structure, at pace, at point of view, at milieu, at etc. We also have to be able to just write a damn sentence that gets people excited and does more than communicate information. It gets people thinking, and it touches them, and it's thematic. So, I'm a contributing editor to Writer's Digest magazine. One of the articles I wrote was on thematic writing, and I used an example from your book, The Accident, and I considered it as thematic writing. Atmospheric descriptions translate your theme into palpable experiences so your readers experience the world you've built in the same way the characters do. That's what I wrote. In Chris Pavone's The Accident, we experience the paradoxes between darkness and light, safety and danger, and good and evil. And I'm going to read the quote, and then I'm going to tell you my question in advance. The excerpt is laden with symbolic imagery. At first, the mood is heavy, hard, frightening, and then it shifts. And so I'm going to ask you to talk about that. Isabel stares across the room, off into the black nothingness of the picture window on the opposite wall, its severe surface barely softened by the half-drawn shades, an aggressive void invading the cocoon of her bedroom. The room is barely lit by a small bullet-shaped reading sconce mounted over the headboard, aiming a concentrated beam of light directly at her. In the window, the light's reflection hovers above her face like a tiny sun illuminating the top of her head, creating a halo, an angel. Except she's not.
Oh, thank you. I probably wrote that sentence, I'm going to say 14 years ago, and I don't think I've read it since. So that's not completely familiar to me. It definitely sounds like me.
It reads well, doesn't it?
I like it, yeah.
It is the symbolism. And I guess the question is, do you imbue this kind of symbolism on purpose, or is it part of just what comes out of your brain?
No, it's purposeful. And there are times for it, and there are times to not do it. And a lot of the book is not a time to do it. And I think there are a lot of different ways to be a good writer. And I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all situation. I think one of the ways that writing feels good is if it's consistent in its way, if the voice feels cohesive and it feels like there's a person behind it, and that person sounds like somebody and you want to spend time with that person. I think that is good writing. Some of that good writing may have no modifiers at all or no punctuation other than periods. Some of that can be very staccato. I think I love Ernest Hemingway, but Ernest Hemingway would hate my writing. He would hate it. I think this is a choice. That's not necessarily a good choice or a bad choice in how much symbolism you want to try to imbue in your sentences. And I think there are readers, passionate readers, dedicated readers, readers who are reasonable people who would read my books and absolutely hate them. Too much symbolism, too much politics, too much trying to be clever, too many SAT words, too many run-on sentences, too many fragments, too much style. And I would say to them, fair. I don't disagree. This is a matter of taste. This is a matter of chocolate and vanilla. There is no right answer to this. I happen to prefer chocolate, but that doesn't mean that I think that vanilla is wrong, that I'm trying to write a particular type of way for readers who like that. That is not all readers. I'm glad that you're one of them. But I can also see plenty of people reading a sentence like that and thinking, oh, give me a break. Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I mean, you're more generous in spirit than I, because I would just say, what's wrong with you? Can't you just recognize the beauty?
I know that as a reader, the most important thing to me is getting enjoyment on a sentence level. That's the thing that I enjoy. And I think the hardest thing to do is humor. And I don't read funny books, qua funny books, because too many jokes make it impossible for me. But I just read a wonderful book called Lost Lambs by Madeline Cash. It's a debut novel. And the plot is sort of nonsense, but I don't care about the plot in this book because the sentence by sentence writing and the characters brought me so much joy every page. And that joy is about turns of phrase and vocabulary choices and dialogue choices. And as you're talking about, this just the sentence by sentence level, but there are plenty of really successful authors and great books who on a sentence by sentence level don't provide anything remarkable, that they're building character and building plot and building tension without ever making a vocabulary choice that a reader would say, oh my God, what a great word, without ever turning a clever turn of phrase, that those things are not necessary for the writing to be successful in its way. I think it's perfectly possible to create a great page-turning suspense novel without ever once saying a beautiful thing. I don't think you need to say beautiful things to make a certain type of book really enjoyable experience. It looks like you disagree with that.
I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I can't disagree because everything you're saying is logical. But I mean, my next example is from the Doorman, and it's actually how we first met, because I just had to tell you how fabulous I thought it was. And I guess my point is, and the reason I'm a little skeptical, is without this excerpt, which I will read, how is someone who's never been to Manhattan and never been to Manhattan in this era that we're in and never been there downtown, as opposed to just hanging by Times Square or wherever they may be when they go as a tourist, how would they know? And the story depends on them knowing on a visceral level. So to me, this excerpt is about as good as it could possibly be to create that immersive experience where a reader sees it, feels it, gets it, understands it, without you. I mean, it's all telling, it's all exposition, and yet it's all showing. So let me read it.
This is very exciting. I can't wait to find out what this passage is.
Well, you'll remember, because that's what I sent, I referenced it when I first wrote. But my question to you is going to be, did I get it right? Is that what you're doing? And if so, how can you say it's not everyone would like it? All right, I'll stop now. Here it is. The downtown restaurant was packed with the usual assortment. Scuffy guys were doing their best to make sure everyone knew they were artists. Paint-spattered boots, nicotine-stained fingers, noontime whiskey. Man bunners on bar stools swirled and sniffed biodynamic panette with a vigor that suggested emergency. A table full of Zuma fashionistas were angling their wine glasses and their appetizers and their pouts just so for their cameras, swaddled in the tan plaid and the red soles and the circular little badges. A trio of young guys, one white, one Indian, one Chinese, all stared at their phones wearing different colors of lightweight hoodies and sneakers, a United Benetton of tech Brodom. A pair of skeletal ladies were lunching on Chardonnay, dressing on the side.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. But that's the thing that I'm trying to do there. And that thing is not necessary for a book to be good. I'm not arguing against a sentence like that or a paragraph like that. I don't know if there's a period in there.
There were several.
That's what I want to do. That's the experience that I'm trying to create. I'm trying to tell you, I'm trying to bring you to a very specific spot at a very specific time and show you these very specific people, because that type of specificity is part of my mission. That's one of the things that I think makes a Chris Pavone book a Chris Pavone book. And whether that's a downtown restaurant in New York in 2024, or whether that's Luxembourg in the rain in 2010, or whether that's Lisbon, a Lisbon hotel room 5 or 6 years ago, that I am trying to bring you there. That is something that I specifically want to be doing as a writer, because that's something that I think defines my books. I don't think it's necessary for a book to do that to be good. If that's not the type of thing you want to write, I don't think you should try to force yourself to write it. It's the type of thing I want to write because it's the type of thing I want to read, because that's the type of sentence that I love in other people. And so that's the, or paragraph that I love when other people
Right.
write. So it's the type of thing that I want to write myself.
And you think that you could have us, not you, you think an author could have us understand the dynamic without going into that kind of explicit summary detail?
No, not really. But the question is, I mean, what to have in a novel is really a question of making choices. What is doing the story good here? What am I trying to accomplish, and how am I going to accomplish that? And I think for a lot of stories, a paragraph like that might not be necessary. And for a lot of writers, it might not be something they want to do, because for a lot of their readers, it might not be something that they want. It is for me as a writer. It is for my readers, and you're one of them. And it is for the type of book that I'm trying to write. That type of thing is exactly what I'm trying to do. But I don't think it's necessary. Do you know what I mean?
I do. And it's a nice introduction, segue into my final question for you, which is, I mean, really what you're saying is write the books you want to write the books that reflect your voice, your style, your ambition.
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you is, what advice do you offer new writers?
To be deliberate. I think that's the thing that we need to focus on as writers all the time, is concentrating. What are you trying to do here? Don't fill up a page. And I think this is one of my pet peeves, is writing to daily word counts, or writing on a specific schedule, or thinking that this makes you a professional, that if you produce 1,000 words a day and you do that for 90 days, you have a book. Does that make you a professional? I think there's a false set of goals that we create when thinking about how to do this thing of creating worlds. And I feel like one of the things, the main thing we should be focusing on is focus. What is it you're trying to do here? What is this character for? What is this scene for? What is this sentence for? What is this word for? And one of the reasons that I'm relatively slow at what I do is I spend a lot of time in editing myself, challenging everything, seeing what can I get rid of? What word can I get rid of? What sentence can I get rid of? I do this multiple times for every book. I have a pass at the manuscript whose goal is only one thing: to make the book 10% fewer pages. If it's 450 pages, I want to delete 45 pages. And I set out to do this. It takes me 2 weeks. It takes me a week worth of reading and marking it up, and then a week worth of inputting those changes and making other adjustments necessary. I do this 2 or 3 times per book. I spend more than a month every book doing nothing except making it 10% shorter. And I feel like one of the reasons I do this is this exercise of making sure that I'm being deliberate. What is this for? What is this for? And I'm not saying it needs to drive the plot forward. I don't believe in that. And I don't believe that also in this question of this very hard, very abstract question, does this need to be here? Which is a very slippery slope in fiction, because if you just reduce it, none of it needs to be here. None of it. The book doesn't need to be here. It's not real. It's made up. We don't need any of this. So what is this? Do we need this? I don't think is a great question. What is it doing? Is it establishing character? Is it establishing mood? Is it moving the plot forward? Is it creating a tension? Is it creating a valley between tensions so that people can breathe and develop the character and pause for a bit before we get to the next moment of drama? What is it doing? If it's not doing anything, then it's worse than doing nothing because it's slowing it down, it's getting you nowhere, and it's making people want to give up. So whatever it is, whether it's a sentence or a paragraph or a scene or a chapter, it needs to be accomplishing something. And I feel like it's important to be able to articulate to yourself, what is this doing? And that's one of the things that I'm trying to accomplish in my incessant editing and cutting, is making sure that everything is justifiably there. And some of those things are matters, I mean, it's all a matter of opinion, but people can disagree. Is this accomplishing something? Is that paragraph that you just read, is that accomplishing something that we want to accomplish in this book? I think your opinion and my opinion on a paragraph like that is absolutely. But I think it's important to do that regularly across an entire book. What is this for? Is this doing us good? Have I done this already? I would not want to write that paragraph twice in the same book. Twice would be too much. Once is the right number of times. So
let me just interrupt.
Yeah.
Do editors ever question your choices? And how do you react? And how do you react to your editors' queries on those?
With an open mind, hopefully, and not defensively. That's what editors do. That's the whole point of editors. And my first editor is always my agent. And there are a number of people who read each manuscript of mine and give me feedback. And questioning my choices is exactly what they're for. That's the whole point. Like, is this character doing what we want this character to do, or would we better off without this? Is this plot element really worth it, or is this just sort of treading water and not moving forward? Is this ending satisfying enough? Is this beginning? Is this tone a little bit too something or not something enough? I think that's what we need from editors, and that's what editors are there to provide.
I interrupted you. Did you have something else that you wanted to talk about with the idea of deliberation?
No, I mean, I feel like if you set out each day to write 1,000 words, you are then rewarding yourself sometimes for writing unnecessary words, for writing sentences that don't need to be there or are not doing enough good to be there.
For writing quantity, not quality.
Right. And and so much of what I read that's disappointing is disappointing in the same exact way. It is not providing enough new on every page. And whether that new is new enjoyable sentences or new sparkling dialogue or new beautiful description of the place or new moving the plot forward, if it's not new, it's worse than neutral. It's bad because it is reminding a reader, reminding me that we're not getting somewhere fast enough. That new is what's fun. Like reading the same idea over and over again, even if it's a nice idea, that's not that fun. And
that's a very good point. I think a good observation is that things have to keep moving forward. They have to keep charging forward.
Yeah, and I don't even mean in a plot point. It's a plot point that's important. But what is this doing here? Is this providing something new or necessary that hasn't been provided before? Or have you just, of the 1,000 pages, can you delete 600 of them and have accomplished the same thing? And if you can, you should delete those 600 words and, start again. But that's a disappointing thing for a writer to do. You don't want to write 1,000 words and delete 600 of them because that feels like you're moving in reverse. You're not getting closer to having produced a thing. And I think that's a very dangerous mood to put yourself in. I think it is so great to realize that you can delete 600 words. That is an accomplishment. That is a worthy accomplishment. That should be a goal every day. Can I delete 600 words? Then do it, absolutely, and give yourself a medal. I think producing 600 unnecessary words is much worse than deleting 600 unnecessary words.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
I can't thank you enough. This has been a real pleasure. And I look forward to the next time.
Thank you. You're a very generous interviewer, and I thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
Be in touch.
Thank you very much, Shane. Take care.
Oh, isn't he wonderful? I'm telling you, he just was great. Such important information. He was so generous and clear, articulate, just great. So I'm now going to open it up to questions. I know we are running long. John and I can both stay until around 2:25, 2:30. But I do want to make an announcement that I'm pretty excited about. I think you know I have alluded to an in-person mystery mastermind. Well, it's coming together. Registration is not yet open, but the information is available now. We have created the website page on the website. The dates are September 13 to 16, 2027. So a year and 3 months from now, just about. I want to give people plenty of time to plan and think about it. And also a lot of the components of it, the people I'm interacting with book very far in advance. So the bottom line is there's going to be 2 blind readings from an editor, top editor who has Big 5 experience as an acquiring editor of crime fiction. So this is Mystery Mastermind in person. One before the retreat and one after the retreat, and then we'll have a follow-up Zoom to put our plans together. We're going to be at a luxury villa in Sarasota, Florida. All ours. Everybody has an ensuite bathroom. There'll be a private chef to be preparing our lunches and dinners. And there'll be plenty of quiet time as well, but there'll be 2 packed days, reception, welcome reception, and a wrap-up on Thursday morning. So if that sounds like it might be of interest to you, I'm sure John is now putting up the link. And there are only going to be 5 spots, just 5 spots. And welcome your inquiries about it. Now, with that said, I just cannot tell you how excited I was to interview Chris Pavone. I just adore him. Don't agree that some people wouldn't like his writing. How can you not like that writing? All right, John, back to you for questions.
Okay. We're opening up with a quick one. What's the minimum and maximum word count for murder mysteries and suspense these days?
There's a wide range. Agents have told me that as few as 70,000 words would work. And I actually heard someone say they would love to have a fully developed, tight 65,000 word mystery. Thrillers tend to run longer than traditional mysteries, cozies. And I think 110,000 words is long. Hank Felipe Ryan comes in around 90,000 now. I think 80, 90,000 is pretty reasonable, unless you're writing a thriller.
Okay. Someone asks, Chris uses expat the way thriller writers use zombie, as he discussed. One word that instantly tells you the kind of story you're in. What would the cozy mystery equivalent of that be?
Cozy mysteries, cozy mystery titles often include puns, which is code for you're going to have fun. They also often include a clue as to the protagonist's either occupation, leisure activity, hobby, or the setting. In other words, if the theme of them all, of the series, is that they're set in a bed and breakfast, it might be Sleep Tight. Do a little better than that, but you get the idea. If you look at my titles where Josie was an antiques appraiser, Consigned to Death, Deadly Appraisal, and the like. Last Quiche would be for someone who was the protagonist was a chef or a caterer or owned a diner. I guess you might not have quiche in a diner, owned a restaurant.
I didn't realize my mic was muted. I believe we'll probably get into this more in depth in September during Create Edge of Your Seat Suspense. But someone wanted to know, how can you talk about how small details can create tension? Something like leaving a letter for someone, but it falls under the desk and isn't found until later.
Well, that sounds good. I'm not, but I don't really see that as a small detail. That is a sort of an incident. A small detail would be more like putting something in the middle of a list. I do this all the time with Josie, where the psychologists tell us we have the rule of primacy and then at the end. So the first thing and the last thing are the ones that stick in people's memory. The rest of the list just kind of goes in one pot. And so therefore, if I want to make sure that I'm playing fair with the reader and revealing the information, but also make sure they're not so likely to notice it or remember it, put it in the middle of the list. And yes, I will be going into creating tension and very specific strategies to create tension that leads to suspense in the September webinar.
Excellent. Someone says, I generally write in first person. In my last novel, I wrote in first person, but crossed the fourth wall several times. What do you think about crossing the fourth wall?
Crossing the fourth wall refers to talking directly to the audience. It's actually a playwriting point of view issue. I think you need to be careful, and I would probably also encourage you to make sure you're doing it as a separate chapter or a separate section within a chapter so there's no reader confusion. Other than that, it sounds interesting.
Okay. We have just a couple more, and it's 4 so far. Someone says, I'm rewriting a novel that was in first person to third person, but I like the idea of keeping a little distance. Do you have any advice on how to maintain that distance while still giving readers fully developed characters they can understand and relate to?
Yes, and you saw my grimace because I have done that same thing in both directions, first to third, third to first. It's very hard to make that revision. Internal reflections is, I think, what you're looking for. In third person, one of the ways that you share important character information and information about that will help the reader get to know them is that you allow them into the protagonist or the character. It doesn't have to be the protagonist, into the character's head. And we actually have a webinar on internal reflections that I think would be helpful for you.
Okay. Someone says, if it's not new, it's not worth it, is a great outlook. That being said, if we believe there are only 7 original story types, what can we do to create new and worth it without being derivative?
Well, I'm going to answer that in 2 ways. If we're talking new ideas, I'm going to refer you to my book, Beat the Bots, because one of the chapters is called Idea Fisher, and it is harnessing the creativity tactic that is scientifically based, researched, proven, to come up with truly innovative ideas. And you must, in order to break through in a crowded field. And that, beating the bots is part of it. But that isn't what Chris was talking about. What Chris was talking about was something new on the page, which could be a plot twist, but it also could be that description that I read aloud of the downtown vibe and scene from that his point being, all right, now they know. Now my readers get it. So even if a character comes to a downtown hotspot 100 pages from now, I don't need to describe it again because that would be repetitive. It's been done. And some of the examples he used were sparkling dialogue, evocative description. It could be a revelation about a character, anything like that that is new.
Okay. Someone asks, Chris spoke how important titling is. I understand that selecting a title, though, is almost entirely up to the publisher. Is that still the case?
Yes, but you're not going to get a publisher if your title isn't compelling in exactly that way that he was talking about. Most of my titles were changed, but not all of them. And I worked very hard and still do work very hard to come up with titles that do exactly what Chris is talking about. They tell the reader, and in this case, when we're trying to sell something, the reader is the agent or the editor, tells the reader what it's about in a compelling or intriguing or engaging way so that there's no question in the reader's mind. They want to at least read the first paragraph.
Okay, and one final question. They ask, the speaker said that we shouldn't set a target to write a set number of words per day because it creates useless words. However, I always thought that this was something to worry about for the second draft, and that in the first draft, it was important to keep momentum and write no matter the quality because you can't edit a blank page. Where do you find the balance in worrying about the quality of what we write, even while we're writing that first draft?
What you are describing is a beautiful example of each writer needing to find his or her own process. I have very often been on such a tight deadline, I have to write to a quota. And I believe that it is more important for me to get words on the page for exactly the reason you just described, that you can't edit a blank page. And Paula Manier, Paula Manier, literary agent and mystery author in her own right, she puts it this way: don't get it right, get it written. And I really think there's something to be said for that. One of the points I make in Beat the Bots is to free up your creativity, you must in fact separate the editorial analytical part of your brain from the creative part of the brain. And I do talk about it as quantity versus quality. For me, and I think for many of us, go for quantity and then come back in a separate step, take away those 600 words that Chris was talking about. You know, the sort of the famous line about that is kill your little darlings. It is very hard to take away those 600 words, but it's crucial. And for me, it is better to write more and edit down rather than really try to write at a high level first. But try it. That's the point. Because we each have to come up with our own process, I think it makes a lot of sense to experiment. See what works for you. You never know till you try something. And I know you all can do it. I'm very confident about that. And with that note, John, any final words before I say my final?
No, I'm going to post the link one more time about the in-person Mystery Masterminds Writing Retreat. Otherwise, we will be in touch early next week with a follow-up handout, and then later next week when the when the replay for this goes live, if you'd like to review everything Chris said on your own schedule. So
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you all for staying with me. I know we ran a little late, and until we meet again, I wish you great strength and solace from reading and writing. Take care, everyone.